that impact the system. It is actually it is deeply systematic. It's deep involved in the psyche or the social ethics of the people. So this deeply systematic issue is what's affecting every layer of society. It's affecting every layer of society economically, and it leads to strengthening the corruption in our society. So as practices get deeper and more entrenched in our society, foreign investors who fear the society because of corruption stop coming and stop investing. So this lack of investment stifles innovation and hinders economic growth, keeping most African countries in a cycle of poverty or in a situation where that they cannot get out. So this cycle of poverty will stay in motion in society because corruption erodes trust in institutions. An institution is, let's say, the judicial system. So if there's corruption, there's trust is eroded in that kind of establishment. So when leaders and officials are seen as corrupt, it diminishes public trust in the people. You cannot trust somebody who is corrupt. This diminishes confidence and undermines the legitimacy of the government or the governance. This lack of trust spills over into everyday life. Your life every day, because you don't trust the judicial system, you don't trust the police, you don't trust the government. It spills over into your everyday life. And once it spills over into the everyday life, it affects how citizens interact with each other. It also changes how citizens interact with the government because of this lack of trust. Moreover, there's a stark correlation between high level of corruption and low standards of living. In areas where there's high level of corruption, you find in that society people are living way below poverty line. In regions where corruption is rampant, you'll find there's also a lot of poverty or lack of progress or wealth. So the resources that could have improved infrastructure, resources that would have improved healthcare, or resources that would have improved education are misappropriated, and then leading to inequality and, of course, increased hardships for the people in that society. The evidence is clear. Corruption is an enemy of progress because it's draining resources and hope for the millions in that society that lives there. So, one of the reasons it is terrible and how the African countries can combat this ill, or why it's difficult for African countries to combat this, because many African countries face significant resource limitations, hindering the ability to allocate sufficient funds and manpower to investigate and prosecute corruption effectively. So, limited budgets for anti corruption agencies and law enforcement agencies can severely hamper efforts to tackle corrupt practices. Another reason why African countries have a hard time fighting corruption is even when resources are available, challenges in mobilizing and allocating these resources efficiently can impede anti-corruption initiatives. You may have an initiative, You don't have the resources, but when you get the resources, you can't even allocate those funds properly. Bureaucratic inefficiencies, lack of transparency and resource allocation, and competing priorities within government can all contribute to inadequate resource mobilization for anti-corruption efforts. So it's a tough battle to win. Another problem why African countries have a hard time fighting corruption is, in some cases, there may be existing laws, there may be existing regulations aimed at combating corruptions, but weak enforcement mechanisms undermine these efforts. Corruption within the law enforcement agencies, corruption within the judicial system, and other relevant institutions can result in a lack of accountability, for corrupt actors, allowing them to act with impunity. Another reason why African countries have a hard time fighting corruption is ineffectiveness of existing laws. When anti-corruption laws are in place, they may be poorly drafted, they may be outdated, or they may be lacking in enforcement provisions, rendering these laws ineffective in combating corruption. So weak legal frameworks fail to provide adequate deterrent or penalties for corrupt behavior, thereby undermining efforts to curb corruption. Another reason why African countries have a hard time fighting corruption is complexity of corruption networks. So corruption often operates within intricate networks involving government officials, business leaders, and other influential actors. So disrupting these networks requires comprehensive strategies and resources, including specialized investigational techniques, international cooperation, and targeted legal reforms. Without none of those, African countries have no strength of fighting corruption. So strengthening resource mobilization efforts to ensure adequate funding, support for anti-corruption initiatives is number one. They have to do that in trying to fight corruption. Enhancing enforcement mechanisms and ensuring the impartial and effective application of anti-corruption laws. If these laws are there, then they must be put in place or they must be acted upon. Revising and upgrading legal frameworks to address gaps and weaknesses in existing anti-corruption legislation. Without that, you will have all kinds of agencies to fight corruption, but it will not help a single inch. I think people or government should encourage fostering collaboration and operation among government agencies, civil society organizations, and the private sector, and of course, international partners to tackle corruption comprehensively. If you don't bring all these players together to combat corruption, it's not going to happen. So by addressing these challenges and implementing effective anti-corruption measures, African countries can work towards building more transparent, accountable, and equitable societies for their citizens. Because as we know, where there's corruption, there's poverty. And corruption is the enemy of progress. It's evident that corruption possesses a significant obstacle to progress in Africa. Capital hemorrhage and taking money away for development being put in people's pockets is a hindrance. It's not going to help countries. Countries like Seychelles, Cape Verde, Botswana, Mauritius, and Rwanda have shown better performance in combating corruption. Their success can be attributed to strong laws and robust institutions. If you do not have strong laws and robust institutions, you may not be in a position to fight this evil of corruption. And that's all I wanted to say today. So please, thank you so much for listening to me. I really appreciate it. But the governments have to learn that it has to be a concerted effort between agencies, because the networks of corruption is too strong and too big, and nobody can fight them alone. With those few remarks, I just want to say thank you, and I will see you in the next recording.